Hi, I'm Chad with Move for a Guitar. This lesson is from our series Music Theory for Guitar. In this lesson, I'm going to explain slash chords. First off, if you'd like the diagrams for everything in this series, including the diagrams for this lesson, you can download our free e-guide, Music Theory for Guitar. And this e-guide will be something that you can study and use as a reference for years to come. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to just go download it. This is part 4.15 from our series Music Theory for Guitar. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So in this lesson, we're talking about slash chords, and slash chords are very common types of chords. And I'm sure if you've been playing for any amount of time, you've run across them or even played them, maybe without realizing them. And actually, through these theory lessons, we've talked about a form of slash chords. I just didn't mention that they were a slash chord. And a slash chord is written as the chord name, a slash, and then a note name. And I'll show you that in a sec. It really just looks like a letter, a slash, and then another letter. And the form of slash chords that we've talked about so far that I didn't mention were slash chords were inversions. And on your screen right now, you should be able to see that we have an A major triad here, and then we have the two inversions. We have first inversion and second inversion here. The root position is not a slash chord, but first inversion and second inversion are slash chords. And all a slash chord is a chord with a note other than the root in the bass. So for example, first inversion right here, you have the third in the bass. Second inversion, you have the fifth in the bass. The reason the root position isn't is because you have the root in the bass. So the lowest note you play, if the note is other than the root, that is a slash chord. So these are all A major triads, but if we were to call out first inversion specifically by its specific name, it would be called A/C sharp. So A is the chord and C sharp is representing this bass note as your lowest bass note. Or if we were to look at second inversion, it's another slash chord, and that would technically be called an A/E because this lowest note is an E note, and then it's an A chord, so it's an A chord with an E note in the bass. So that's what a slash chord is. It's a chord with a note other than the root in the bass, and the chord is always written first, then a slash, and then the lowest note. So a lot of beginners get confused by looking at this. It looks like maybe it's two chords or it's two chords combined, but all it is, like I said, is the chord and then the lowest note called out. Or if we were to look at seventh chords, or any chord type really, but we're just going to look at triads and seventh chords for this lesson because the concept applies for all chord types. If we were to look at drop 3 G major sevenths, this is in root position obviously, so this is not a slash chord because your lowest note is the root. But first inversion would technically be called a G major 7 / B because this is a G major 7 chord. The lowest note is a B, so it's a G major 7 / B. Second inversion would technically be called G major 7 / D because this is a G major chord, lowest note is a D, so that's why it's called a G major 7 / D. And third inversion would technically be called G major 7 / F sharp. So this is a G major 7 chord, this is an F sharp as your lowest note. Or if you just play open chords still, if you're still just a beginner playing open chords, there's plenty of slash chords that you've probably run across and maybe seen it written out or maybe played it without realizing it's a slash chord. For example, a G/B is a very common chord. And if this was a regular G major chord without the slash in it, you'd have the root right here as your lowest note, and then this would be open note as well. But typically when you're playing this slash chord, you mute that out. But your root would be the lowest note with a regular G major, but a G/B, you take that lowest root out, you just keep the third as your lowest note, which in a G is a B, the third of G is B, so this is a G/B. Or another really common one is a C/G. You have your regular C major chord right here, but you can add the G in right here, which is a fifth, and make that your lowest note. Then you'd have a G/B, and this is a really common way to play a C chord, a C major chord, by adding this G in the bass because it makes it a lot fuller sounding. So this is a lot of players will play this exclusively when they're playing a C major open chord just because they like the sound of that. Or probably the most common one is D/F sharp. You'll run across this one all the time. You have your regular D chord right here, but this is your third in the bass, which is an F sharp, so it's called a D/F sharp. Or another one is an F/C. You have your regular F major chord right here, but then you have a C in the bass, which is the fifth of the chord, so it's an F/C. And those are all examples of slash chords with the bass note being part of the chord. So for example, with this G/B, the B, this bass note, is part of the G major chord. A G major chord is spelled out G, B, D. So this is the third of the chord, which you can see right here. So this is part of a G major triad. And the same for each one of these. You can see with the C/G, the G is the fifth of the chord, the D/F sharp, it's the third, the F sharp is, and the F/C, the C is the fifth of the chord. But with slash chords, they don't have to be part of the triad. So for example, you could have a G/A. Like I said, a G triad is spelled out G, B, D, but now we've put an A in the bass, which is the ninth, so you have a G/A. This A is not part of this G triad, but it's still, you can throw that in the bass and it'd be a G/A. And everything I've shown you has been diatonic, meaning, for example, a G major chord, you have an A in the G major scale, or if this was in the key of C, you have a G major chord and an A is also in the C major scale. So this is all diatonic, but you could do chromatic as well. For example, you could have a G/B flat, which is the sharp 9 of G, which is not diatonic because in the G major scale there's no B flat, there's a B, or in the C major scale there's no B flat, it's a B as well, and G is actually in the D major scale as well, there's no B flat in there, it's a B as well. So this B flat would be the sharp 9 of G, which is not diatonic. And technically with this one, this is a flat 3 as well, so this could technically be a G minor chord. But you could use this as a G major chord, especially if you're doing something like going from a G/B with this as your lowest note. Maybe you pick this note, then you go to a G/B flat and pick that note and then strum the chord, and then a G/A, pick that A and strum the chord, and then a G major to end. You have this movement of the third going down to the flat 9, the flat 9, or the sharp 9 going down to the 9, and then from there you go back to the G major chord. So it creates this nice bass movement if you're picking those notes. And that's one reason slash chords can be really handy, is you pick the note, create some sort of bass movement, but also just in music they can create more interesting sounds to have a note other than the root in the bass. Or it could just be that you're playing a triad or something and it's just the voicing you're using and it doesn't have the root as the lowest note. It doesn't have to even necessarily be written as a slash chord in every instance. So there's lots of reasons to do it. If you're looking at a piece of music and it's written specifically that way, there's usually a reason that it's written that way. It has to do with the composition of the music, so there's a purpose for it. But if you're just playing along and there's a piano or bass, you don't necessarily even have to play what's written as the lowest note. For example, if you saw a G/B, you could just play a G major because the bass or the piano would take care of this note and it wouldn't really be on you to have to worry about it. Or if you ever came across a slash chord and you didn't know a fingering for it, you could just play the chord and not worry about the lowest note. So that'll work as well. And one more thing I want to mention about inversions. For example, if we're looking at this first inversion of G major 7, which is G major 7/B, you wouldn't even have to call this a G major 7 in first inversion. You could just call it a G major 7/B, and if you know your music theory, you would know that's first inversion because the B is the third, first inversion has the third as the lowest note. You would just automatically know that a G major 7/B is first inversion. So that's an explanation of slash chords. You can go pretty deep with the theory of slash chords, and when you get into composition and writing your own music, you have more purposes for using them or really calling them out. But they're important to understand even if you're just a beginner, because you're going to run across them all the time. And we'll cover these more in depth in later lessons. I just think it's important now to at least have the basic concept of them, and especially to understand that when you see a slash chord, the first letter name called out is the chord, the second is the bass. So this is a chord, this is a note. So go ahead and move on to the next lesson where we're going to talk about chord progressions with borrowed chords. A really important subject to understand, so definitely move on and watch that. Be sure to download the eGuide. All these diagrams are in there, and be sure to subscribe because we add at least one new lesson every day.